July 2nd, 2024. The time is 10 a.m. In attendance are Commissioners Matari, Brooks, and Duncan. Are there changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Public comment. Hearing none. Our first item, Justice Center update from Turner, Townsend, Heary with David Mendez, please.
Good morning, David Mendez with Turner, Townsend, Heary. So this morning, I don't have any, I've not copied you on an update. We don't have any updates in cost this week. The biggest event this tomorrow morning, 9:30, we're going to have the topping out ceremony. Looks like they're doing all right on that. So the steel will be completed at that point, and a little bit of a ceremony then. Just met with Jeff, your new facilities director. We'll meet next week and kind of update and see how our roles fit together and update where the projects are. So we still have the roof anchors to get you a number on. The final permit set, drawing set, that CCD 6. I'll need to get you finalized numbers on that. CCD 7. The same, and the windows that we've talked about. Just to correct the record, I was incorrect on that's the judge's chamber on the existing building on the west facing. There's 2 windows there that were planned to be taken out and sealed over. We found that we can just leave I call it a clear story. It's not really technically a clear story, but it's a smaller window in those 2 offices that will allow light to be in there. So we'll get final numbers on that to make a decision whether that's the route you want to go. And that would be, let's see, the last item is that's we don't have any under the construction contingency at this point. So that's all I have for you on costs. I've put out an advertisement for FF&E, so we'll need to discuss how that's going to be received and probably read next meeting. Read the recipients of those from that result of that advertisement.
Okay.
And get that going.
Great.
Okay.
Bill, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay, Bruce?
No, thank you for the update.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Okay, item 2, appreciation of service. And I understand that the sheriff has a presentation?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Bob Norris, commissioners, members of the public, fellow co-workers. We want to thank Tom for his 5 years of dedicated, committed service here to the veterans and their families of Kootenai County. You're doing an outstanding job over there. I appreciate you being out in the public and being out accessible to veterans, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. I do it at the pleasure of the commissioners, and you've always given us great support down at Veteran Services and the rest of the county staff. It's a great environment to work in, and it's a great environment to have so many veterans in the county that we can assist. So I always say it's a team effort, and I appreciate everybody else that helps us accomplish what we accomplish every day.
I think Tom is one of those people, as Bill Brooks. Tom is one of those people in the county who loves his job. He when he's off duty, he carries around a pocket full of business cards, and he looks for people to give them to veterans. And he's 5 years after starting, he's just as enthusiastic, if not more so, than he was the day he started. So thank you very much, Tom.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we have a couple items here for our assessors team, and our chief deputy assessor is here for the addition of the 2024 property assessment subsequent roll. This is a discussion. Mr. Savage, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dyson Savage, Chief Deputy Assessor for the record. You should have in front of you a calendar that we can reference as we go through this. I wanted to give you guys a brief introduction and kind of orient you on the topic. As you know, in statute, there are kind of three roles that are our tools to modify the role after July 8th. These are to capture occupancies or capture real property that is transferred between exempt entities by statute. This is the missed roll, the subsequent roll, and the occupancy roll. Now, what we've done historically is kind of lump all of these together to be done in January. So we have used the missed roll timing as a deliverable timing for the full occupancy roll, the full subsequent roll, and that has caused kind of a lot of heartache at the end of the year, because if you go back a couple of weeks, that means you're balancing and troubleshooting and figuring everything out right at the end of December, which is the worst possible time. Just this last year, Matt Snow and I were spending Christmas Eve together at 5 a.m. finishing balancing of the occupancy roll so that we could get notices out and get everything finished. From my standpoint, it's not really sustainable for the long term, and it's not really what the statute is wanting us to do. The missed roll really is to capture everything in December. It's not to capture everything throughout the year and have all of occupancy land there. So what I'm recommending is kind of a twofold change. So the first is moving to a subsequent roll timing as far as statute goes, which means that we would ship the subsequent roll at the end of November and hold BOE along that timing, and then also mailing out monthly occupancy notices and finishing the occupancy roll about the same time. So our final mailing would happen in November. This is contingent on an aspect of the project we're undertaking with XTR so that we can get the assessment notices out the state way, which will allow us more flexibility and allow us to send out these occupancy notices on a monthly basis starting in September. We're starting in September to give ourselves some runway as far as timing goes so that we can get some testing done and figure out if this is viable, if we can do it. My cutoff to make sure that method is going to work is the second week of August. So if we can't get notices out that way, or we're not done with that part of the project yet, we'll default to doing a big mailing at the end of November, but I will still be pushing for monthly balancing as we're going so that we can troubleshoot issues and handle them on a 3-month runway to the end of November instead of everything happening, first 2 weeks of December and trying to get everything done then.
Questions?
So I just want to understand, you suggesting that we're doing a monthly BOE right now.
Right.
So there would just be some additional BOE in December?
No. So I believe you can handle all of the occupancy appeals during the BOE timing for the subsequent roll. So statute has you sit as BOE for the subsequent roll the 4th Monday of November through the 1st Monday in December. Mm-hmm. I believe you could hear occupancy appeals during that time frame. It would still be 28 days from the notice. So if you see on the calendar, we have our first round of occupancies going out the 16th, and that would put the deadline to appeal as the 7th of October, and it would kind of roll forward from there until we get to November. And then our last big mailing for occupancies is November 29th, and we're doing that so that we can get as many occupancies as we possibly can throughout November onto the occupancy roll.
So is this kind of condensing your process a little bit, tightening it up?
Yes, and it's reining it back from December.
Yeah.
Before it would kind of bleed into December, and then we were running all over the treasurer's timing, and everybody's waiting on us to get stuff done. This would allow us to kind of put everything together and be done in November, and then it's just contingent on appeals that come in through December.
Well, conceptually, it sounds good. I guess the only question I would have is, have you spoken with the other elected officials who might be affected by it and just get their take on it?
Yes, I have brought this to the steering committee. We did discuss it. This update is part of that process where I wanted to let everybody know and get opinions and see what everybody thinks and make sure that we're all on board before we make this change, because it does have an effect on a variety of offices. I still am going to put together a full email to IT because they're much more involved, because they help us a lot with balancing. So we'll have to get on the same page, but we have about 2 months to kind of get everything figured out and what we're going to do before we would do this in September. If anything changes, I'll be back before you giving an update if we run into something or something changes.
I noticed in November that it looks like the week of Thanksgiving is the BOE, and I know that many of our offices are closed on Friday.
Yes. However, appeal volume will be significantly lower. Historically, appeal volume for the subsequent and missed roll has been, or subsequent and occupancy roll has been extremely low. I think the most that I've seen so far is 2 appeals that we've had. It's typically very low appeal volume, and we have all of those days to figure it out as far as when to hear those appeals. But again, that part is up to you guys completely.
Just a lot of people go on vacation that whole week, so that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. I don't know. Jelena, did you have questions?
No. We discussed it in our steering committee meeting, and it seems like if everything goes as smooth as it's supposed to, it'll be a good thing, because we'll be getting the roll earlier, which, I mean, truly doesn't totally affect our office, but more so the treasurer, so.
Okay. And then any other counties do it this way?
This is much more similar to how Canyon does it.
Okay.
And a lot of counties don't do anything in December. It's kind of, they all do it on the subsequent timing. So we were kind of unique in how we were doing everything on the missed roll timing.
Okay.
And you're basically emulating Canyon at this point is a safe bet, right?
Yeah.
And that's good, because now you have some institutional knowledge that you can tap into down there. Hey, how do you deal with this? And we're not just kind of in our alone world, if you will, trying to muddle our way through this.
Right.
And what about documentation? Are we documenting all these processes really well as you're developing them? So,
Yes, absolutely. This calendar is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. A lot of this is documented really well between myself and the BIAs as we're making changes to this process and how we're going to test, and making sure that we've got that all clear and answering any questions as we go. So we want to be more transparent and open as we're working our way through this, but with the goal of taking the pressure off the end of December.
yeah. And so if a new bus driver comes in, they'll be able to figure out how to control the vehicle.
Yes, that is a key aspect of this, is making sure that we can, if I'm gone or any of the BIAs are gone, it's repeatable, it's easier, it's not as stressful as, coming in and having to do it at the end of December, and it's well documented.
But Dyson, isn't it true though that, just so the board understands a little bit better, the way that we've been doing it is subsequent is due, and I'm roughing it, November or whatever, missed is December. We've always done it combined. We're separating them now, and in statute, that's obviously the way it is. I would say a majority of the counties have sub and missed.
Majority just do sub.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah, they don't even, it's kind of an optional, oh my God, we found, a Gosler mansion
Right.
with $15 million. There's an out in statute to kind of help recover that. And that's part of the issue, is that it's really designed to help compensate at the end of the year. It's really not designed for your primary deliverable. That really should be the end of November.
So we've been doing it to capture those few that may be on the mist in that short window. We just have historically done it in December, but by pushing it back to November, it really gives you guys more time, the treasurer more time, especially with all the House bill changes and crazy things that have been happening that have been slowing them down in general. So by doing it in November and maybe having a few that would have been on that missed roll, I do feel like it's better for us as a county, honestly, for all the offices involved.
Okay. Bill, any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Thank you. Item 4, XTR update.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch base with you guys really quick. We have a much more metric-driven update that Bela is working on to give you guys right now, as far as the deliverables that we have finished and percents of where they're at. It is much more coding heavy, so XDR has codified a lot of that into kind of a dashboard, and Bela is putting that together with an update of the resources we've used so far and some of our troubleshooting, so you guys can expect that in a written form from him here pretty soon.
When you say dashboard, is this like a management tool so you can look at it and see how the workflow is going through the office?
Not really that sophisticated. I think it was something that Sam put together to kind of identify, hey, we're working on these things, here's the % complete, here's how many hours have gone into those things, so that you guys can see, where the hours are being spent and what projects they're being on. And one of those is moving to the state method for occupancy assessment notices, so that we can avoid some of the heartache that we went through last year. But that's one of the deliverables being worked on right now.
Do you keep kind of a list, a bucket list of all the things that need to be addressed within the software?
Yes, yeah, we've got 14 of those, and sometimes we've added a couple of them as we've come across things that we think are more pertinent.
Sure.
The biggest thing right now is there's a fix we're doing to shadow tags, which is kind of a fundamental classification within our system, and that's a very large coding undertaking because it touches a lot of the other systems, and that's what XDR has been primarily working on. It's taken a lot of time to kind of unwind that and get a patch together to fix that.
And of course, your ultimate goal with this is to set up the system so that when the next upgrade comes along, major upgrade, or I think that's the only thing we've really talked about at this point, that all the data tables will be in the right place, doing the right things so that you can make that transition much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Any vendor that comes in to help us transition to a new system is going to have expectations of our data. They're going to say, you're a profile system, right? So your data should look like X or Y. And doing this project will align us much more with that. So when we're in the process of going to a new system, we don't also have to do this entire project and then move to a new system. Is kind of one of the primary goals of the entire project, as well as bringing us much closer to the state and allowing us to leverage the state's reports and dashboards, so that we don't have to do as much of that in-house.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you doing this because it's not an easy task, and there's a certain kind of knowledge base that you have to have in order to really, get into a project like this. A couple quick questions. Because one of the things I said last year was I was really hoping that we could use software to help develop more efficiencies within the organization. But in order to actually do that, you have to start developing organizational metrics. Because if you don't know what you want to measure to determine whether you're running efficiently, whether you need more staff, how your workflow is going, the processes and so forth, flow charts, then it's very hard to get software to actually just make things more efficient, if you will. Do you see this software helping out in the department as far as understand or monitoring workload, helping with metrics, or is that something that you think would have to be done outside?
I think that'll definitely have to be external. I think the profile element system doesn't really have a lot of workflow metrics in it. The closest we're going to get is on base. I see a lot of room for efficiency there as far as process flow and ways to track things, where we can kind of get a little bit further away from paper and start to handle things more online and adapt to that better. So I think on-base will be the better way to leverage that. I know Platform, the new system from Momentum, has more metrics that they're working on, more dashboards, more business intelligence applications. But we're on kind of the older system. The changes that we will have a direct effect on efficiency through allowing us to do some things in Momentum that we haven't been able to do before, just because there's configuration changes that we're going to be making, allowing us to handle things like homeowners exemptions without having to have a cancellation. So we'd avoid all of that paperwork. But as far as insights, we'll probably still have to be developing those on our own.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking this on, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Okay. Bill, anything further?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. All right, item 5, process clarification for public defender sick leave payout. And we have a little flow chart here.
Brandy Falcon for the record. The purpose of us being here today is just to clarify how the board intended this exception to policy to work. Every time you approve an exception to policy, inevitably employees call and get angry at payroll because employees were under the impression it was going to happen one way, and we are under the impression it happens a different way. So just going off the memo that the board signed when they approved this exception to policy, I guess the first point of clarification is, does it apply only to public defender employees that are transitioning to the state with a 9/30 term date, Or does it apply to all public defender employees that stay through 9/30, even if they don't go to the state?
That was my intent, was for all the employees, whether or not they transition to the state or not. I mean, that's not something we can control. We're 3 months out and we still have no salaries. We still don't know what the public defenders are going to make. There's other questions that are being discussed too in the transition process. So that just was my intent, was if you stay, because right now the county is on the hook to provide public defense through 9/30, and I wanted to make sure that we had as many people as possible, just like we gave 911 retention bonuses and tried to help those people stay here to provide the service.
Okay, so if an employee terminates on September 29th, we are not going to include them in this exception to policy. Even if it's only a day difference, I just have to draw that line and say, only if the termination is 9/30 do you fall under this exception.
I would argue that it should be, if you don't turn in your notice by 9:30, that the whole point of this was to get people to stay, not to give them a payout as a bonus per se, but to legitimately, carry through with the transition. October 1, if they want to give their notice, they can give their notice. But at that point, they've fulfilled their obligations. But what I don't want to see is a bunch of people giving their notice beforehand with their last day being September 30th. I think that just circumvents this. I think if we're going to make exceptions for people, that there has to be goodwill on the other side.
Okay, so I'm going to say they have to stay through 9/30 in order to fall under this.
And cannot turn in a resignation before 9:30 or before 10/1.
So part of the, I guess, difficulty is going to be that payroll has to manually process all these terminations, and those forms are actually due like before we even enter that pay period. So they'll actually have to have them to us by mid-September, just for timing purposes, for payroll to be able to process, because we have to process all their terminations and their payouts and all of that. And so that's just normal policy. Whenever an employee leaves, we have to have that paperwork to us the Thursday before the next week when we process payroll. So the auditor's office is going to establish a cutoff date, August 31st, where we need public defender employees to tell us if they're going to the state or not, because there's other information we need from them depending on that answer. So I know Rayanne created this little flow chart that you have. So the second thing that I wanted to clarify on the record is like the order of operations, the order in which we're making certain payouts, because that matters. So any employee that stays through September 30th will be treated under this exception to policy. So first we have to know, is the employee going to the state or not? If they're not going to the state, then their vacation hours will be paid. Well, we'll have to update this because now you just told us that they'll be treated under this exception. So if they do go to the state, though, the question that we have to answer is, and there were 2 new laws passed, where the county has to pay up to 40 hours of sick to the state and up to 40 hours of vacation to the state if the employee has those accruals available and if they choose to have us make that payment. Yeah. So that's why we're going to need to know ahead of time the employees that are going to the state. So for sick leave, if they are going to the state, we need them to tell us how many hours, if they have available, up to 40 hours, are going to get paid to the state. So that's step 1. Once they've told us that, step 2 is any remaining vacation hours will be paid out in accordance with standard county policy, and 40 hours or all, if employee has less than 40 hours of sick remaining, of sick will be paid direct to the employee. That right there is the exception the board established, paying it directly to the employee instead of into an HRA VEBA account. Third step, if they still have any remaining sick leave, those sick hours will be paid to the HRA VEBA based on the following years of service. And that's where the board lowered the 30% threshold down to 2 years instead of 5. So we are doing things in that order, and they have to be done in that order. So I just wanted to explain that to you and make sure that you're aware that's how it's going to work. Any questions?
Bill, were you able to get that flow chart? Do you have any questions?
I have excuse me, no questions, and I think that it's being handled correctly. I like the attention. It's not just well, it's being done so it won't be taken advantage of, and I think that's very good.
Okay.
So we're just going to need to establish a point person in the public defender's office because Jen and Ann are leaving in July. So we're going to need to know who in that office is going to be responsible for processing all of those forms and sending them to our office by that August 31st deadline. So, okay, thank you.
All right, item 6, Hayden Area Regional Sewer Board Dissolution MOU. I just wanted to know if either of you had any questions or concerns before I bring that before a business meeting. It's pretty much straightforward. We're just trying to do this methodically and as logical as possible. So,
The sooner we can get this executed, I think the better everyone will be.
okay. Bill, any questions on that?
No questions.
Okay. There was just one section in there that talked about going to Ada County for state district court, and I don't know. I'll talk to Dave about that because I'd rather keep it in Kootenai if we can. All 3 entities are in Kootenai. So we'll talk about that, maybe make that change. So, all right. Well, if no other questions, we can go on to Assess, Collect, Distribute Committee Update with Julina Hildren.
Hello. So we decided, not really me, but anyway, to put together a steering committee. And we decided to call it the Assess, Collect, Distribute Committee because it affects the assessor, the clerk, and the treasurer, and then IT. So the members of this committee are committed to focusing on the real issues that relate to the day-to-day processes. These are the people who are actually doing the jobs. So we thought it best to not have any elected officials on the committee. It's purely collaborative. And our committee consists in the assessor's office of Dyson Savage, our chief deputy assessor, in the treasurer, Jill Smith, who's our chief deputy treasurer, IT, Matt Snow, our senior application systems manager, and Alex Swanson, who's an application systems manager. And then in the auditor's office, it's me, the senior grants accountant, Alicia Lynch, who's our tax accountant, and Kat Clancy, who's a tax accountant in training. And again, these are all the key players in the processes that go from the assessor all the way through to the treasurer. Alicia so kindly volunteered to take our minutes so that we can track our action items and the decisions that were made, but it's for internal use only, so we won't be publishing those minutes. We've met 3 times so far, in March, April, and June, and we plan on meeting every 4th Wednesday of every month, and then we will present an update on the following week's status update, as long as you guys want updates. And we'll be skipping January and July due to those being the large tax collection months. And we can meet more frequently if there are issues that we need to discuss. Ultimately, the goal is to be open and transparent with each other regarding changes in processes, testing and troubleshooting, everything from software to mandated legislative changes, and updates on anything that affects the cumulative tax process from assessment all the way to distribution, like I've said. So just a brief summary of a few things that we've discussed. We've talked about designating people in each department for onboarding and department status of testing, proper funding and lead time for IT upcoming project requests. We did discuss like the TSB reporting dashboard. We're trying to get to more of a state, what the other counties are doing. So we're trying to see how we can integrate that into what Kootenai County does. tracking the XTR's progress and funding for work being done is an allowable expense for funding on that the board approved. Where is the funding coming from? IT, assessor, treasurer, and then, but the assessor's office will be giving those monthly updates, whether it's in status update or a written form. We've talked about the new process for the solid waste fees, where we are transferring the process from the assessor to the treasurer and getting corrected bills sent out. Changes to the schedule of calculating the sub and occupancy rolls, like Dyson had said. One of the other things is the HTR, the homeowner property tax relief, is predicted to run a lot smoother this year due to legislative changes, and our estimated roll will be much larger this year due to Ignite CDA, which is Coeur d'Alene URDs, selling some assets, so they'll no longer be exempt. So it's just a good opportunity for us to all be on the same page. So anyway, we just wanted to give you guys a quick update on that. Any questions?
Questions?
No, that was a lot.
Okay.
I tried to be quick. Maybe not brief, but quick.
Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic. I think you hit all of the major hot buttons that I think need to be kept track of right now.
Is that something that you guys want on a monthly update, or do you not?
I would like that, or a copy of the minutes. I don't necessarily
Okay.
have to have one in person, but yeah.
Bruce?
Just to,
I don't mind you coming before status update, just to kind of, I mean, update is in the name of the meeting, so you can give us an update.
Okay.
And let us know if there are issues that start to get sticky, where we might be able to help kind of facilitate the process.
Well, I think that's the bonus, no offense, to not having elected officials in there, because it kind of, it lowers it a little bit, and, you know, anyway.
No offense taken.
So I think, I mean, we have a good group. We all work well together. Ultimately, we all need each other to get our jobs done. So at least at this point, that's how we're feeling.
good. Okay, thank you. All right, item 8, groundwater quality. Oh, this is quantity report. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on.
This really just came up as a consequence or a result of our community development meeting last week. And, you know, with the family subdivision issue. And I kept hearing, oh, this groundwater report is basically worthless, feel good, things like that. So my question is, why do we have a report if it doesn't provide value? Now, I would argue that we, you know, as commissioners, we do have some duty to the people that live here. We have some duty to ensure that the kind of community they want can be maintained somehow while balancing property rights. And so at what point does someone get to do something on their property and it affects other people around them? And I think water is one of those things that we have to be very mindful of. You know, we talk a lot about people who live on a limited budget, don't have a lot of money, their well goes dry, they're retired, they could be looking at $50,000 to $100,000 expense. And if they don't have that money, very limited options for them as far as to be able to inhabit their home. So it just seems prudent, and especially where I live, I can see it firsthand. We have neighbors who actually have their water trucked into them. Their wells have gone dry. And if they weren't able to get water trucked in essence, their homes would be uninhabitable and they would have zero value. So I think it'd be prudent for the board to at least revisit this, understand how we got this report into our system, you know, into our building permit process or the subdivision process, and ask ourselves, are we doing what we can, and what's reasonable, and under what circumstances, if even. And if this report is not worth it, then I have to ask, why do we make this a part of the subdivision process? So Ben is here to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Good morning, Commissioners. So with regards to groundwater quantity reports, we have started asking or requiring those since 2006. And the reason that groundwater quantity reports are required is because when somebody proposes a subdivision, part of the intent is, from the county's perspective, is to ensure that these lots have reasonable utility and livability. So we're not creating lots that are going to be a burden on either the future property owner or some neighbor. And so through the course of our development and our review, water is certainly a primary concern, both of new property owners and neighboring property owners. So again, in 2006, we started requiring reports prepared by geologists and engineers at that point. And what they did is they took analysis of surrounding areas, the well logs specifically, looking at what well driller reports produced and confirming that based on, well, doing an analysis based on those reports, that there's an expectation that this new subdivision will provide a certain amount of water. Now, what our code requires is that each new lot or each dwelling will produce 1,500 gallons per day and have like an actual flow, a peak flow of 5 gallons per minute for 4 hours. And so that's what this report is meant to demonstrate. Now, in addition to that, for areas that are outside of the aquifer, areas that may have a little bit unknown water sources, there is what we call a hydrogeological analysis. And this analysis goes a little bit more in depth. Rather than just looking at the well logs, this report looks at the soil types, how water is recharged to the area, what kind of, how water flows through the area. So there's just more work that is done on behalf of the applicant to say that we've done a more thorough analysis and we still feel that we're capable of producing this amount of water, and we feel that it's not going to have a negative impact on the surrounding property owners. And so again, that's kind of the purpose of why these are required. You may be familiar with other groups that have had interest and concerns about water. More recently, we had the Cougar Gulch rezone effort, again, because of concern with the development that we're seeing and how that may affect the water source that they're accustomed to. As well as in the past, we had a group in the Pleasant View area that wanted a moratorium on subdivisions, again for the same reasons, because they're concerned of water. We've seen appeals on subdivisions on that basis, that they don't feel that the water is available and that the applicants haven't done enough to demonstrate that there is water available. So you mentioned, Commissioner Matari, about the level of value that this report provides. And I could certainly argue that this does provide value, but there could certainly be a higher bar to be set. Whether or not that's something that the commissioners want and a route that they want to go, that's another conversation. I do believe it does add value to the request, but again, how much is debatable.
Does anyone, any of the other commissioners have any comments or thoughts on this?
Bill?
No.
I think just from my standpoint is I don't want to require something that that could be misconstrued as more than it is. So somebody gets these reports and it does demonstrate a low bar, like you said. So I just don't want someone to look at this and go, oh, well, I'm never going to have any water problems because I went through this process. I'm not saying that we need to go any deeper, because the other issue is scientifically, it's just a guess still. There's just no way to absolutely prove that some of these water issues, and so it's difficult, to...
I have to be honest, I feel like I'm hearing two sides, but I can't tell which one is the one that we're either it sets a bar and it gives some assurance, or it can't do anything. And I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just saying, like, what can be done if anything, to establish that new developments aren't going to adversely affect people. And I don't want to do what Ben had suggested, which is the only way you're ever going to know is if you monitor everyone's well. And then new wells get drilled, and then you start watching that. And that, I think, is too much.
But even it depends on where you're at, because even if you do that, you still are not assured that the new wells are affecting the old wells, because it all depends on where you're at in the county and what the ground is made of.
Well,
So
that's true. I mean, I wouldn't argue that this is needed over the aquifer, for sure. But I do just have to wonder, what can be done. And I'm not suggesting that we have to do it, but I think that as a board, we at least have a duty to exhaust that a little bit and look at that and say, does this make sense? I mean, I wouldn't mind just asking Ben, what other options are out there? Because there was something that drove putting this on the 2006 agenda, right, to get us doing this. Now, I don't know if they were doing that just to, placate some people and just say, well, we're doing something, or was this a legitimate effort? I mean, because this is long before our time. But a lot has changed technology-wise, I would think, between 2006 and today, and how people find water. So my question would be, what tool sets are out there today that we could at least look at? And I'm not trying to change things. I'm not trying to force stuff, but I'm just saying at least we can look at it and then we can make a decision that says, this we think is too much to ask of people, but it's there, and maybe we can have that as a tool if a whole bunch of people in a particular community are really that against a new subdivision. We might be willing to say, well, we'll approve the CUP, but this is an additional condition. And we just don't have that as a tool set right now. We just have this report that doesn't really, it says something, but there's no satisfaction guarantee associated with it. It just says something.
If I may add, good morning, Commissioners. I think Chair Duncan, you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to predict the outcome of groundwater availability, especially for properties that are not over the aquifer. I think when the code was revised recently to require professional geologists to participate in preparing these documents versus professional engineers, it was to give it more of an in-depth review of hydrologic analysis. And there's a distinction in the code that states a more in-depth review is required if you're not over the aquifer. If you're over the aquifer, it's more predictable, and I would argue that what would be the benefit of this document if we know that there's likely sufficient water to provide to whatever project is being proposed. But when you're dealing with development that's not over the aquifer, I met on a few different occasions with a group of individuals that were proposing a moratorium over the Pleasant View area. And we had an individual, I think he was a geologist from Idaho Department of Water Resources. And he says this area is quite unique because you have a lot of fragmented basalt and it's very unpredictable. You don't know what vein you're going to hit and whether or not you're going to have a good flow rate or not, and it could be within a few feet. But what we did find, what I find to be very helpful with this document is more recently, within the last few years, we have received analysis from geologists where they advise us on the need to have reservoirs available for potentially low producing wells. And we have been implementing that as a condition of approval. We review the document and we say, okay, this is the recommendation from the professional and we're going to implement it as a condition of approval. In fact, I'm processing the application now where a portion of the property is over the aquifer and they say it's predictable that you're going to have sufficient flow rate, and those lots that are not over the aquifer, they need to have a minimum of so many gallons of reservoir storage. And we're implementing that as a condition of approval to have the future lot owners provide us evidence of either having sufficient flow rate from the well that was newly drilled or recently drilled. And if it's low producing, under 5 gallons per minute for a period of 4 hours, then they have a sufficient reservoir in place that would make accommodations or provide for adequate flow. And so I think there is some benefit. I think one of the concerns I do have, and it has been something that we have all struggled with, is under our code, while a well can produce sufficient flow rate, the question is whether or not it will negatively affect the adjoining wells in the area. And I think Commissioner Matari, when you posed a question of whether or not, or why is this document, or why is this requirement, why was it implemented in 2006? I think you have to ask yourself a question is, what density are we dealing with? If we're dealing with development that is over the aquifer with 5-acre tracts, that's one thing. But if you're not over the aquifer and you are dealing with parcels that are an acre or greater in size, because our code says if you have parcels that are less than an acre in size, you have to have a community well. But if you're dealing with 1-acre parcels and you have a close proximity well that's being drilled on multiple lots, then I'm not a scientist on this, but a number of times there is a question that comes up as whether or not the cone of depression that's being created by the well that's being drilled will have a negative impact on an adjoining well within a certain radius. And perhaps there is more scientific data, but that has to come from the professionals. So I think there is benefit, but I don't know, you would have to look specifically at the request that's being proposed. I don't think you can do it across the board.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a good point that there are some if-then scenarios. You know, if these wells are producing a certain amount, then we cease the investigating of whether or not there needs to be more information had. But if the developer is drilling a well and it's not producing a lot, maybe, you know, that would trigger something else that says, well, you need to change what you're doing a little bit. So we can at least have some care, some minimum amount of due diligence, at least for the surrounding neighbors, because it doesn't happen immediately. It's not a this well comes on and that well goes off. It sometimes happens years later, just through use. And I've seen it. I mean, right across the street, the spec builder built a home, put a well in it, and then was in settlement, and the well went dry. Another neighbor across the street, 2 5,000-gallon cisterns. You know, they're producing 3 gallons a minute. Yeah, mine on the other side of the street was initially producing 38, and even that has dropped some since the last time I had a well guy come out and look at it. So it just seems like we should at least have those tool sets at our disposal. Not that they should be implemented on every situation, but at least in some situations where people want to develop, if their wells don't produce well when they drill, maybe, you know, that's a condition for the development.
Yeah, it sounds like community development is using this particular tool in a way that is beneficial, that, you know, if the low production equals the extra storage. So I think that's fine. I just don't want to create a situation, and I'm not advocating for any change one way or another right now. I just see this sometimes as people put too much stock in it and like, hey, I got my report, I'm going to build my house, drill my well, and I'm going to be good the rest of my life. That's not the case. There's still the unknown out there that can happen. So,
well, I agree with you in the sense that wells do traditionally go dry, just sometimes over time. Things change. But with so much growth here, and the fact that the rural areas are really not rural anymore, they're more suburban, that now is the time to at least have that discussion before we have a whole bunch of people who all of a sudden their wells are not recharging properly, and they are going dry, even though they can still recharge a little bit. It doesn't seem like it's a conversation that would hurt to investigate what other tool sets might be out there as we continue to develop the remaining parcels of land.
I mean, as far as availability of water, that is just something that the county is never going to be able to guarantee.
Well, no one's asking for that.
Yeah.
What I'm asking rhetorically is there a good process in place that says that based upon all these criteria, this is good, and at what point would we want to even include the neighbors if they wanted to participate in well monitoring, which it doesn't seem like we don't even ask that question. I'm not even sure how much of an option that is for people.
Again, you know, when we're getting into the process of the review and making a decision, we'll make a decision on a snapshot in time. It could be a year from now, it could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Water consumption changes, sources dry up, and so even, you know, what we can do up front to give some level of assurance, it's never going to be the absolute. And
I agree with that. You know, so all right. Well, fair enough. It sounds like we have a good place, a good system in place.
I think it's a reasonable request.
Yeah.
Finding some middle ground between the two extremes of requiring nothing and to full-on demonstration and proof. I think this is a good middle ground.
Okay.
All right, Bill, anything?
Yeah, I like hearing this discussion because we need to get out in front of this. It's coming. Water shortage is coming, so it's not a maybe. It's a certainty, and how we handle it will make a big difference.
Okay. Public comment. Anybody online, Jonathan? No? All right. Time is 10:52. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.